Welcome back. Super excited that you're joining us again. He's Troy. I'm Tim. We're two of the pastors here at First Christian, and this is our second week of this kind of fun little podcast thing. Who knows if week 3 they'll have both of us be back? I don't know. We don't have a name for this thing, so if you had a good idea about a name, you can feel free to write that down in the comments and see if we run with it. Probably won't, but you never know. So we're in this series called You Are Not Alone, looking at how Jesus steps into hard moments with us and walks with us through kind of the darkest moments of our life. And week 1 for us was, before we get there, a month and a half, 2 months ago, when we were looking at what we were going to be studying after Easter, you actually brought this and suggested this. So I'm curious, just in a brief overview, what brought you to this idea?
Well, it really was that meeting where we started brainstorming about Easter. I had a different series in mind for post-Easter, but as we were brainstorming, what do we want to talk about? What ideas do we want to hit? This idea of hope came up, which then we landed on for Easter. But how does that impact us when life doesn't go the way we expect? And as we were just brainstorming all these different directions that we could go with Easter, my mind went to the Gospel of John and the post-resurrection appearances, because they all could be used for Easter sermons. And going, okay, well, why don't we just settle in there for a few weeks and hit these different topics of when life doesn't seem to make sense to us, when life is hard, when we're struggling with grief and loss or fear and insecurity or questions and doubt or shame and regret. How do we as Christians walk through those seasons, and how does Jesus come alongside us during those times?
I like it. Because it's kind of fun because the whole series after Easter is both sitting in Good Friday and Easter morning. You get this both, and it's not just, hey, Jesus is great and he's resurrected and your life is going to be awesome. It's, hey, pain is awful and real and definitely a part of our lives. So you get this cool combination between the two. I'm going to actually start a timer so we don't go too long, because we don't want to take up too much of our time, but you and I will talk forever. And so
we will.
We need to have that. So we'll add 2 or 3 minutes onto that just so we're in the clear. But to dive into this week, we were talking about grief and loss. We're full of pain because of grief and loss, and what does Jesus do in that? And so your sermon both had, I'd say, a couple practical realities of how do we engage grief, and then also some spiritual realities too of what happens when Jesus steps in. So I thought we could just walk through both sets of those and kind of see where the conversation takes us. So the first one is, when we encounter loss, we discover a few things. And the first one was that it's okay to cry. And that was interesting to me. You can ask my wife. She has seen me cry, I don't know, 5 times in the 10 years we've been together. I'm not a crier. It's not that I don't care. I am emotionally involved. And sometimes I'll get a little misty, but I don't cry well.
Yes. And
so part of it's do I feel guilty because I don't cry? The other part of me is I don't want to cry. So it's been kind of a journey. So I'd love, where did that come from? Why was that your very first one out of the gate?
Well, primarily because that's the first thing that we see in the text that we were looking at, that Mary was standing outside the tomb of Jesus. She was crying. She was weeping. And as a pastor, walking through people who are going through seasons of grief, tears are very normal, and sometimes people don't know what to do with that. Stephanie's brother died when he was 31, and Stephanie grew up in a family kind of like you, where they don't show emotion, never really saw tears, even her mom. And so when her brother died and her mom just began to sob uncontrollably, Stephanie's brothers didn't know what to do with that, because they'd never witnessed that. And normalizing that. Now, people have different personalities, different emotional ways of dealing with emotional pain. Some cry easily. My mom would cry at a commercial, and I kind of take after her a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit more emotional. Other people are more stoic. Maybe it's how they're raised, or it's their personality. And so that's okay to cry, is that it's okay to feel hurt.
Yeah.
That you don't have to bury the pain. You don't have to bury the grief. Live in it and walk through it, but don't push it down.
Yeah, I think we hear the idea like the pursuit of happiness is something that we value as Americans, and the comfort and the luxury and everything's put together. But for me, that's like a pretty stark contrast to the Bible, which is almost values lament as much as it values peace and comfort. Like it's understanding that joy is consistent throughout, and we'll get into that a little later, but the lament is a good thing, and learning how to feel and hurt. And that's been one of the lessons I feel I've learned in the last couple of years is how to just sit with God in hurt. And we'll hit that in a bit. So I don't want to get too far ahead, but that idea that we've romanticized the rugged individualism and I'm strong, I can do it. No, it's okay to feel pain, because oftentimes you can alienate other people because they think that you don't care. And that's a harsh reality too. Yep. And it's like, no, I care deeply, and learning how to show that it's okay to show that emotions are not a bad thing. They were created by God for our good, and God himself feels a lot of emotions. Jesus wept. It's okay. If Jesus can cry, he's man enough to cry. Then clearly that's a broken concept that we have. The second thing you ran into is it's okay to express confusion and doubt. And I think I would hate for us as Christians to be in a situation when we lose someone close to us and us think that we feel guilty because we might be frustrated or we might be doubting. And so I wouldn't necessarily have come up with that. And I realize that's where the text was leading, but I just off the top of my head, but I love that you came up with that piece.
Yeah, and we're actually going to kind of, in a couple of weeks, just sit in this topic of doubt. So we'll spend a little bit more time during this time focusing on that. But when we experience that loss, questions, again, I think they're natural. That we were talking beforehand as we were sitting down, all of a sudden I thought of that story where Jesus wept, the story of Lazarus dying, and he has two sisters, Martha and Mary. And when Jesus shows up, Lazarus has already been dead for 4 days. Martha runs out to meet him and says, Jesus, if you would have been here, my brother would not have died.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. You fast forward a little bit, Mary comes out to meet him, and she says the exact same thing. Jesus, if you would have been here, my brother would not have died. So you have these
anger and bitterness and frustration.
There's confusion, hurt, anger, all of that wrapped up together, and those are natural when we experience loss. Like God, why didn't you do something? God, you could have stopped this, but you didn't, and I don't understand. And again, we'll talk about this more in a couple of weeks. But with Martha, when she says, if you would have been here, my brother would not have died. She goes, but even now, I know God will give you whatever you ask. And so there was confusion, doubt, hurt, pain, but still holding on to a glimmer of faith and trust that Jesus knows what he's doing, even though she couldn't see it.
Yeah.
And going, it's okay. It's okay to have questions.
Yeah, that's good. That's good, because I feel like death is that moment that is so anti what God, I mean, it is the epitome of what God didn't want. He created life. He didn't create death. Like that wasn't something he wanted. And we're the ones who introduced it through our rebellion and sin. And so I think the perceived absence of God, not the actual absence, but the perceived absence of God in that moment, I think is it feels greater, because that's a moment when that's not godly. Now he's redeemed it, he's reconciled us back to him, and Jesus' death and then resurrection makes that beautiful. But death is still very, very, very wrong, and that's why it kind of tears us up. It's like this moment where creation literally is getting ripped apart, because it's not how we were intended to be.
Yeah, the Apostle Paul calls death the last enemy to be destroyed. And so even though it's been defeated through the resurrection, it's still here, we still experience, and it's an enemy.
Yeah.
It's not how God intended life to be. And so when it comes, and it does come to us all, whether it's the death of a loved one or kind of as we talked about Sunday, it could be death of a dream, death of a marriage, death of a business.
That's good.
There's loss there that we're left going, God, why did you allow this to happen?
Yeah, that's good. So the final one, when we encounter loss, what are the things we discover? So it's okay to cry. It's okay to express confusion and doubt. And the last one would be, it's okay to make a request. And I think this comes back to that same individualism side, but there's this expectation that, no, I'm fine. I can get through this on my own. I don't need help. And this is actually probably one of the most common ones that I've interacted with in people. It's this refusal of help. And my wife and I had a season a couple years ago where she had a surgery for something and people were trying to give us food. And it was a weird moment because I'm like, I'm in my mid-20s. She's in her mid-20s. We're physically healthy. She's put up because of a surgery, but like that's not a permanent thing. Like I can still cook a meal, but that's not what was actually happening in that moment. What is actually happening in that moment was our community was trying to love us. And one of the ways that happens is hospitality. Acts of service is another. You walk through the love languages, the words of affirmation and encouragement. And so in that, I feel like one of the things that I've been learning, and I'm just going off apparently on this, is, and I think my mom was the one who told me this when I was young, and I just have kind of held on to it. I would hate to ever rob someone of the chance to bless me. God has gifted them with the ability to be a blessing in moments of difficulty. And if I'm not letting them, I'm not only robbing myself of the blessing, but I'm robbing them of them using their God-given gifts to bless people. And how selfish is that? Like that's so selfish and not community-based at all. And so learning to be humble and accept help and ask for things. You need help. You might not think you need it until someone helps you. Maybe it's someone coming over and cleaning your house. Maybe it's someone helping you walk through all the paperwork, or I don't know. It could be any number of things. There's so much complexity to loss in death for sure, but also like in business or dreams or any number of the things that you might be grieving. And it's okay to accept help in that moment.
Yes. Yeah, and to be willing to ask. I think that's such a great perspective that you brought up, of that when we don't allow others to help us, we're robbing them of that opportunity for them to bless us and use their gifts to serve us. That's such a great perspective. And I think it does come down to humility. And there's varying reasons. Some people are like, well, I'm strong. I don't need help. At least they don't want to admit that they need help. But there's no... Admitting you need help it's where you learn to grow and work through issues. And sometimes it's not, I don't need help. It's almost a false humility. I don't want to be a burden on others. Yeah. And that comes back again of, no, you're not being a burden on others. You are giving them the opportunity to bless you. Yeah. And in doing that, they receive a blessing. Yeah. And so having the humility to go, I need help, and I'm going to ask for it.
Which actually, I'm glad you said that. I feel like that leads right into the next portion, because we talk about the practical realities. It's okay to cry, express emotion, ask for help. But then so what does Jesus do in those moments? And one of the things I think we need to figure out is the balance of sympathy versus empathy, right? So sympathy is, I look at you, man, I'm sorry that blank happened, whoever died. Like, I truly am sorry. And sympathy has been given. We write like sympathies. It's a sympathy card. Yeah. But the Bible doesn't really teach sympathy ever. It teaches empathy, which is stepping in and sitting alongside them, not looking at them, sitting next to them going, your hurt is a hurt that I am willing to feel as well because I love you.
Yeah.
And that's where it's even a step into it of going, your burden is a burden I want to bear because I love you. It's not because you're being inconvenient for me. Inconvenience isn't a thing. It's only inconvenient if I would rather be doing something else. No, I would rather sit here in the pain with you. And that's really what Jesus does. Jesus doesn't go, hey, I died, I freed you, resurrected, see you later. Life's going to be hard, but it'll be okay in the end. That's not what he does. Like, he really is empathetic and comes into the moment with us.
Yeah, the fact that he comes and he sits with us, going back to the Mary and Martha story and Jesus weeping, Jesus knew what he was going to do.
Yeah.
He knew he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead, but he still sat with the sisters and the friends of Lazarus and wept with them, and he cried with them. And he does the same with us. He comes, he meets us where we are, and he gives us that model to then be empathetic towards others, not just sympathetic, but to sit with people, to weep with people, to carry each other's burdens, to just walk alongside, and just the gift of presence, maybe, of just the gift of just being with.
Yeah. Which is funny because we had a whole conversation yesterday about learning how to intentionally be in his presence.
Yeah.
But we can be in his presence as much as he is able to be in our presence. Him coming to us, even when we don't feel him. That's where the faith part comes in, of knowing that he's with us, even when I can't feel him, I can't see him. He's still there. He knows our hurt. He knows our pain. And even in the confusion and doubt, it's okay to have that. But there comes a moment often, I don't want to broad stroke, because I personally haven't had to lose someone super close to me or walk through a really traumatic season like that. But where in the moments of the hardest, darkest part, his peace is still there. And I mean, we talk about that in a second too, but that's powerful. That's really powerful. So the next one is, when we encounter Jesus, we discover that Jesus knows your name. It's not just he's with you, he knows you deeply and personally. And that comes from the text as well.
Yeah, where Jesus came to Mary, but Mary didn't recognize him. And so that comes back to that idea that there are times where we don't, because the pain is so heavy and so real, the loss is overwhelming, that's all we can see. We don't see Jesus anywhere in it, because if he was in it, wouldn't he make it better? And sometimes he just comes and he empathizes with us and sits with us. But eventually, even though Mary doesn't recognize it, he says her name, and that changed everything for her. And that idea that God, he sees us, he knows us, that I made the joke Sunday about he knows the number of hairs on your head and how, that's...
Some of us, that's easier than
others.
Yes,
it's a lot easier for others, for some than others. But if he knows that, do you think that he wouldn't know your hurt and care? I mean, if he cares about a sparrow falling from the sky, and he cares about you enough to know how many hairs you have on your head, that he knows you and he loves you deeply and passionately.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that this text, and I mean, this is going to be a much deeper conversation than our time probably allows, but I think it's worth hitting, is we often see grief and loss as something like someone close to us dies, it's a family member or whatever. And we're currently watching in our culture, American culture right now, a grieving happening with our Black brothers and sisters who have lost someone because of the ongoing reconciliation and struggle that's trying to happen of often it's the situation with, is it Dante? Oh man, I hate that I don't know the last name. Dante White, but Dante. But is a situation in Minneapolis where a black man was killed not too far away from where the current trial is happening for George Floyd. And there's deep, deep, deep grief from our Black brothers and sisters, because it's a struggle that their community is feeling at a heart level. and it's ripping people apart because it feels like there's no hope. Like it's this ongoing everyday situation that they're constantly having to face. And I actually watched, and the reason this comes back to this, I watched a church leader who's black just sit, and he said it. He's like, this isn't very polished. I apologize for not being able to say this well. But I just need someone to mourn with me. And I think that's the cool thing, because one of the important things I think that I'm needing to continually remind myself of is, as a kingdom person, I need to be able to see moments of brokenness and injustice and be able to figure out, okay, what would Jesus do in this moment? Not what would my culture do, not what would like my community do, but like as a Jesus follower, how do I inject hope and peace and rightness into this moment? And I feel like oftentimes we try and fix it, or others try to justify, wow, it's like, Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus sits down and weeps with them, or he acknowledges the Samaritan woman and sees them and knows her name, for lack of a better phrase. And you actually quoted a black man living in a white society, kind of reflecting on that tension on Sunday. And it's Ralph Ellison. I'm not familiar with the quote itself, like where it came from, but I loved how powerful it was. It said, I'm an invisible man. I'm a man of substance, of flesh and bone and fiber and liquids, and I might even be said to possess a mind, which I love the little bit of humor in there. But he said, I'm invisible. Understand, simply because people refuse to see me. And that's something that Jesus never failed to do. He always saw you.
Yeah.
And there's beauty in that, because it means not only is he seeing you for who he made you to be, but he sees you in a way that allows him to mourn with you when you're mourning, which is something we're called to do.
Yeah. And that's, I think, as you read the Gospels, the stories of the life of Jesus on earth, that's a common statement where it says Jesus saw. Jesus saw. Jesus saw him. Jesus saw her. Jesus saw the crowd. And not just kind of a glance, oh, yep, they're there, hi. He paid attention to them.
Yeah.
And I like that phrase, pay attention, because it means it cost us something.
Yeah.
We have to pay attention. And that's what Jesus did. He paid attention to people. And it is so easy in our culture today to try to be divisive and instead of trying to seek unity. And that's where the empathy comes in. That's where it comes just to sitting with people in their hurt. Because again, death isn't the way God intended it to be. And so when somebody dies, regardless of the cause, we should mourn that. Yeah. And so to be able to sit with people, to grieve with people, to grieve with people who are different than us, people who believe differently than us, because again, loss is not God's intention. God's intention is restoration and wholeness, shalom.
Yeah.
And that's what we are to seek. We are to seek the welfare of our community. We are to seek the shalom, the wholeness, the joy, the contentment, the peace, the unity of our community. Yeah. And I think one way we do that is to grieve with people. Yeah,
I love that. I love that it challenges me to learn how to set down my worldview, because it could be any number of, it's just any time that there's diversity, socioeconomic, ethnicity, different countries, even different languages, like there's so many different ways of diversity, and yet the diversity is valued in the kingdom of God. Revelation 7 has the people, nations, tribes and tongues, and that our God, our King, is the God over all of that. And to be able to understand, like, I need to be able to sit in that and allow my heart to, feel the mourning and the joy, and how to celebrate well, and and it's this constant putting down of self, which comes back to that same conversation we had earlier, and celebrating what God has made. And the only way to do that is to continually die to myself and let Jesus and the Holy Spirit do something incredible in my heart, because unity and like reconciliation and shalom being like, this is what we want. We want true peace and joy and hope. And that's something that idea of shalom is traced throughout the entire Bible, and it's beautiful. And it takes situations like this, and it doesn't make it less complex, but it provides, and this is where I think we need to end on, both for time-wise and for the thought, but Jesus gives us a purpose in it. It's when we're faced with grief, Jesus steps in and gives us something to hold on to that's deeper than just, hey, like, you'll make it through it, just hang in there, and let me know if you need anything, but it's not actually let me, it's, Jesus gives you something tangible to hold on to, and that's hope. Yeah. And I mean, I would love to hear your thoughts on where you went with it.
Yeah, that idea of purpose, just tying it into our text on Sunday, that Mary, a woman whose testimony would not be allowed in a court of law, was the first to testify to the resurrection. And that God can use you. I think there's a phrase I heard one time, and it just has resonated with me, that God believes in me oftentimes more than I believe in myself. And if our listeners God believes in you, he gives you something meaningful to do. He gives you this sense of purpose. And sometimes we struggle, like, well, what is that purpose? And we're trying to think of something grand and big. For Mary, it was, hey, go tell somebody that Jesus is alive. Go tell them that I'm alive. But that renewed her energy. And sometimes we get caught up in trying to find a specific purpose. And maybe it's just, we just need to show the love of Jesus with people. Yeah. And how powerful that is, again, because it pushes us outside of ourselves, oftentimes outside of our comfort zone, outside of our selfishness, and going, no, I exist to help other people and point them to the hope that's in Jesus. Yeah. And when I realize that can help me work through that grief, because I'm like, oh, I'm still going to sit in my grief. I'm not going to rush the process of the grief. I'm still going to wrestle with my doubts, but in the same time, I know that God's given me something to do, and so I'm gonna do my best to try to do that in whatever way I can. But understanding that God believes in me, and I think that's a powerful thing.
That's so good. That's so good. I love that. Man, we really have just a minute. I love that idea, like you said, of this lady who wasn't respected. Her testimony wouldn't have been accepted, and Jesus steps in and says, like, even in the most broken pieces like that of like how we have removed dignity from someone, God's able to still, like, you still matter. And basically saying, like, you are not alone, which is exactly where we're sitting. So love you guys. So grateful that you're joining in here with us. If you've made it this long, congratulations. You're one of the few. And we're going to keep this conversation going. Next time, John is preaching on questions and doubt, fear and insecurity on Sunday, and really looking forward to that conversation. I think that's going to be something that resonates with a lot of where our culture is, both for young adults all the way to our senior adults. Fear and insecurity right now is huge. So really looking forward to that. And so you probably won't be here. We'll have John here, and I don't know if I'll be here either. But we love you guys, and we'll see you back here next week.
See you guys.